Hello, welcome to episode 5 of the Foxerie. We're talking about ego development. I'm Trix, clinical psychologist, and this is all in the aid of social confidence. I'm starting with the basics. Well, I'm continuing with the basics. You might be thinking, why are you harping on about ego development? I just want to get to the good stuff where I can become socially confident. The reason for this is that you need to see and be able to recognize in yourself where your social development may have stalled or is coming undone. And it usually means discovering a bit more about what makes you, you, than you had previously recognized. It seems to be that in the world of amateur psychology, where people who are unfamiliar with psychology generally make assumptions that just aren't true. They just presume, hey, I was born, I'm just the way I am because I just kind of am the way I am for no particular reason, and that's that. I'm trying to provide you with a framework and grounding to better understand who or what you are, hence ego development. Now, the ego, or ego as it's called, is basically you. It's who you are. People often don't like that idea. They like to think that they are separate from the ego, or they own an ego, but they're not the ego. We just have to throw that out the window. You are the ego, end of story. It's important to understand this because one of these erroneous beliefs that people have is they just naturally became themselves just because, just because they grew up, just because they were born, they became who they are. This is wrong. You, that is, you as an ego, were built from the ground up. Moreover, you need to be maintained or you will come apart. So the you, that is you, is a constant, ongoing process of maintenance. When you understand this, you'll understand that each and every one of us are trying to maintain ourselves at all time. Therefore, the problem of social confidence, one of the problems at least, is the problem of feeling like you're coming undone in the face of a social interaction. And you need to learn how to stay yourself when you're socializing or in the face of a social event in order to have social confidence. So let's go back to the model of the ego that I've been developing. And we're going to talk a little bit more about the id today, particularly early childhood. So let's get our black pen out and we're going to draw the now familiar or becoming familiar circle. Not a great circle today, just not vibing my circle skills. And here is the ego structure, the basic ego. Okay. Now, the question is, when does the ego start? Well, when do you start? Because remember, you are the ego. So let's just remind you of that. You. And if you're from Texas, we'll just put it here, y'all. There we go. Just want to leave out my Texan friends. Okay, so you were created at some point when the ego came into its sort of existence. And it's not at the time of birth. It actually happens a few years after. Before that point, the ego, at least theoretically, this is supposed to be a circle just by the way, is still submerged. Where? It's submerged in, we're going to call this it world. Whoops, messy there, which probably suits it world. This is it world. And if you want to get a little bit more Freudian, that's also called the id. It's like id world. Now, when you're born, as in physically born, the body's born, this is probably, we'll call this pre-ego. It's not quite, whoops, let's just modify that. God, that was terrible. I'm just going to erase that completely. There we go. Let's try that again. Let's try and get that a little bit neater. There we go. Pre-ego. Okay. And pre-ego lives or is submerged within this thing called it world. This is the world where you're pretty much ruled by bodily processes. These are things like being impulsive, everything's a bit magical. Maybe I should write this down. That's probably a good idea. So in it world, let's see, magical. What does that mean? Nothing's particularly logical. Things just seem to happen because they just seem to happen. You're not really able to make logical links. It's very grandiose in this. This is a sort of childishly grandiose or entitled kind of vibe in this world. It's very impulsive. You want stuff now. You don't want to wait. What else? It's about sort of need gratification. I just have these needs and I want them gratified now. And if you think about children, this is kind of a pretty accurate description of young children like that. And one thing to say too, it's very energetic. If you look at little kids, always running around, playing, they're always up to something. And the world feels pretty special in that state. But you can't live there forever. Now, if you didn't develop, meaning if your personality or your ego structure remained pre-ego, then you would sort of be this magical, entitled, impulsive, energetic little critter, right? Now, we know that that doesn't really happen in our society. And what we see is this motion here over time as you develop. Let's change colors. The ego emerges. It kind of makes its way out of it world. And this is what we call maturity. This is maturity, if you like, or development, if you prefer. Development. And this is really, in essence, you, as you are thought to be, this is the process of you being born. Not at the time of your body's birth, but actually somewhere around the age of 3, usually. Maybe a little bit younger, maybe a little bit older. So what the process of ego development is, at least in childhood, is somehow helping the pre-ego, which is a sort of vague notion of your personality and personness, creeping out of the id world or it world into sort of mature world. And if I just get rid of this diagram just for a moment. Let's just take it away. There we go. Let's make it a little small. So this is it world here. And this is sort of a few years later and a few years sort of beyond that. So here's early childhood. Here's your sort of pre-ego submerged. Here it is starting to sort of creep out a little bit. And here it is sort of more, it's sort of out. So it kind of rises up out of the depths of the it world like this. Maybe it even keeps going, who knows. So this is an important concept developmentally, to know that your pre-ego, pre-you, emerges. And this is maybe, let's say, age 2 years, and this is maybe 3 years, like this, something like that. And this little space here, therefore, let's put another color here. This space here is something quite special. This is the space that starts to emerge when you start to leave it world. So if this is it world, let's just call it it world, or just it, and it again. This is the sort of magical world of it in here. What is it? Who knows? It's just craziness, really. And I'll talk a little bit about it. We still experience the it world pretty routinely. Some of us do more than others. This is the world you go to when you dream at night. Think about this in reverse. Here you are in the daytime. Here's your ego. Still a little bit in the it world. Still a little bit of that magic sort of thing connected to the ego itself. This is your waking state. So when you're awake, this is literally awake, walking around in the day, this space here represents the you that you know yourself as. let's reverse this. As you go to sleep, so now imagine, whoops, let's change color. I want to go to black again. If this is going to sleep, I'm just going to get rid of these little things as well. Let's get rid of the ages. At the end of the day, as you're getting tired, you start going back this way. So this ego, which was sort of risen out of the it during the day, now starts to submerge, goes down and submerges back into it world and fast asleep. Whoops, there we go. Now, what do we know about it world from dreams? We know it's crazy world. All sorts of weird and wonderful things happen in it world when you're asleep. And then in the morning, once again, the pre-ego rises up this way and back up, and you're awake. So now we have this other model of ego development, which is our sort of waking and sleeping model, if you like. And the question is, how awake, meaning how far up, can the ego go? And what does it mean if we can pull ourselves way, way out of this it world? What does it mean for this space here? What is this space? That's the subject for the next video or the next few videos. I want to say a few final thoughts here about this. If we go to this part here, this early part of the diagram, let's just get rid of some of this extra stuff on the page. Oops, I didn't mean to rub all of that out. Let's put that back. There we go. I'll shade a little bit more there. Okay, let's say a little bit about this. Imagine if this is where you lived all the time. You didn't develop for some strange reason. This could be the case of a neglected child or those feral children that you sometimes read about who are raised by wolves. You wouldn't develop. There wouldn't be a person there in the sense that we know a person, meaning personality, a sense of individuality, a sense of identity. There just isn't that at all. The pre-ego remains pre-ego. And what we would see in terms of behavior is a lot of it behaviors from that child. Sort of a bit, well, feral, basically. Then we could suggest that if the child did in fact manage to develop a little bit more, this ego here is still heavily influenced by the it world, meaning it's still quite childish. It hasn't really pulled itself out, so it's still very magical in its thinking, very entitled, grandiose, self-centered, impulsive, and so on. And this one here, less influenced by it. So now you can see the more ego development you get, the more maturity you gain, and the less influence you have in your personality by it, if that makes sense. So let's say someone who is an adult in their physical maturity, but not very ego developed. They're still sort of here. They're still sort of childish in a way. And you do see adults like this. They're kind of still impulsive, they're still self-centered and egocentric, and they're all into their needs and so on. And when they meet people who are sort of more ego developed, you could say there's a bit of conflict often between them, as this ego doesn't understand this ego, and this ego vice versa doesn't understand this ego. So this is one source of conflict as well in the world. The other thing to note too is you can be a sort of high-functioning, ego-developed person with this kind of thing going on, but as you get stressed or as things get difficult, you can regress, meaning you can sink back in and submerge. Why do we do that? Why do we bother sinking back once we've achieved this great ego-developed state? Is because it's a defense. It helps us cope with stress. What does regression look like? Well, lots of things really, but you could say as you regress, as you become stressed, you become more impulsive, more childish, more tantrumy, more demanding, and so on. You can probably relate to that. Maybe you're doing it right this minute as we talk. that's all I wanted to cover in this video. In the next video, we're going to talk a bit more about what it takes to pull the ego upwards. Why does the superego, let's just write it on the page, aka the rules, social rules, etc. Why does that pull the ego out of its world? And how maybe to do that? And is there a risk? Maybe it's not all good all the time. Anyway, that's enough for now. Thank you for watching. Please feel free to like and subscribe. And also, as usual, your comments are very welcome. Bye for now.